The first time I saw Chester Chuckles, he was at the end of our driveway, a splash of color against the drab, rain-soaked asphalt. I remember the way he laughed, the sound of it high and bright as a bell, carrying through the wind-whipped air. It was a dreary day in the Chicago suburbs, the kind of day where the sky seemed to press down on you, heavy and low. I was 14 at the time, more interested in comic books and arcade games than in the world outside my window. But there was something about that laugh, something that drew me to the window. "Hey, Mom," I called, turning away from the window to glance back at the kitchen. "There's a clown outside." She barely looked up from the pot she was stirring. "That's Chuckles the Clown," she said, her tone dry. "He's doing a kids' party down the street." I went back to the window. He was closer now, and I could see the garish red of his hair, the oversized shoes. His face was painted in traditional clown fashion, a white base with red lips and nose, makeup painted over his eyes. It was a face that should have been friendly, inviting even, but there was something in his eyes that seemed off. I shivered, pulling away from the window. That night at the dinner table, my younger brother Timmy couldn't stop talking about the clown. "Mom, can we have Chuckles at my birthday?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "He made balloon animals, Mikey, and he did magic tricks." I shrugged, pushing my peas around my plate. "He's just a clown, Tim." But Timmy wouldn't let it go. And 2 months later, on his 8th birthday, Chester Chuckles stood in our living room, pulling a rabbit out of a hat and making the kids laugh. As he performed, I watched him, watched the way his eyes would linger on the doors and windows, the way his gaze would flicker to the stairs leading to the bedrooms. I felt a knot in my stomach, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake off. When he left, hours later, he turned and gave me a long, lingering look. His painted-on smile didn't reach his eyes. "See you around, Mikey," he said, his voice low. And then he was gone, his laughter echoing in the empty street. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent around me. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs. And yet I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in the shadows Chester Chuckles was lurking, waiting. And so began our dance, a dance of smiles and laughter, of magic tricks and balloon animals. But beneath it all, there was an undercurrent of something darker, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't know about the other kids, the ones who had disappeared. I didn't know about what was buried beneath the floorboards of Chester's house. All I knew was that there was something wrong about Chester Chuckles, something deeply, deeply wrong. And I was determined to find out what it was, for Timmy's sake, for all of us. The true horror was yet to come. Chester Chuckles, or rather John Chester as he was known in his ordinary life, lived only a few blocks from us in a modest ranch-style house. His job as a machinist gave him the appearance of an average, hard-working man, but his pastime as a clown was what he was known for in our neighborhood. He had been in the area for years, a familiar face at kids' birthday parties, county fairs, and community events. And yet, I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Chester was always good with the kids. He had a knack for making them laugh, for making them forget their worries and just enjoy the moment. But there was always a darkness lurking behind those laughing eyes, a darkness that became more and more apparent to me as time went on. The weeks turned into months, and the months into a year. Chester Chuckles became a regular fixture in our lives, appearing at various events around town. But I couldn't ignore the way he looked at us, the way his eyes lingered a little too long, a little too intently. Then one day, Timmy went missing. It was a normal day, just like any other. I had been at the arcade trying to beat my high score on the newest game. When I got home, the house was silent. Too silent. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Timmy's gone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He went to play at the park and he didn't come home." The police were called, a search was conducted, but there was no sign of Timmy. The days turned into weeks, and still there was no word. The town was in shock, the joy and laughter that Chester Chuckles had once brought now replaced with fear and suspicion. Through it all, Chester Chuckles remained a constant presence. He offered his condolences, he helped in the search, he even organized a community event to raise funds for the search efforts. But I saw through his act. I saw the darkness in his eyes, the cold, calculating gaze that hid behind the mask of a clown. One day, I decided to follow him. I kept my distance, watching as he went about his day. I watched as he interacted with the kids at the park, as he performed his tricks at a birthday party, as he returned home to his modest house. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. He was standing in his backyard, a shovel in his hand. He was digging, the earth flying up as he worked. I watched, hidden behind a tree, as he dug a hole in the ground, a hole that was far too big to be for a plant or a tree. That night I lay in bed, my mind racing. I knew what I had seen, I knew what it meant, but I also knew that I needed proof, that I needed evidence. And so I made a plan that would lead me down a path I could never have imagined, into the darkness that was Chester Chuckles. The following day, my plan went into action. I approached Chester's house under the guise of returning a tool my father had borrowed. He welcomed me inside with his usual unsettling grin. The house was normal enough, or at least it appeared to be. The living room was cluttered with the detritus of his clowning profession. Oversized shoes, a rainbow of wigs, and an unnerving number of handcuffs which he claimed were for magic tricks. As he went to fetch the tool in another room, I took the opportunity to look around. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully moved towards the back door. Outside, the freshly dug hole that I'd seen from my hideout was now covered. I crouched down, my fingers digging into the loose earth. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but the sight of an object, an item of clothing perhaps, stained and discarded would have been enough to confirm my suspicions. But there was nothing. Feeling a wave of disappointment wash over me, I stood up, brushing the dirt off my hands. That's when I heard it, a muffled sound like a whimper coming from the house. I froze, listening. It came again, clearer this time, a quiet cry of distress. I sprinted back to the house, the cries growing louder as I neared. They were coming from beneath me, the crawl space. My heart was pounding in my chest as I moved towards it, pulling at the small door set into the floor. What I found there will haunt me for the rest of my days. It wasn't Timmy, but it was a boy, not much older than us. His body was bruised, his eyes wide with fear. He was bound, his mouth gagged. I quickly moved to untie him, my hands shaking. The boy was too weak, too scared to move. Just then I heard a sound behind me. I turned around to find Chester standing there, his usual grin replaced by a chilling scowl. "What are you doing, Mikey?" he asked, his voice as cold as ice. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The scene before him was evidence enough of his monstrous deeds. The boy from the crawl space was proof of the unspeakable horrors that Chester Chuckles, the man who made everyone laugh, was capable of. Chester stood there, his face a mask of pure rage. His usual joviality was gone, replaced by a menace I had never seen before. "What have you done, Mikey?" he growled, taking a step towards me. His clown persona was completely gone now, replaced by the monster that lurked beneath. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I was afraid, but I couldn't let that show. I had to be strong, for myself and for the boy lying terrified in the crawl space. "Stay away from me, Chester," I said, my voice trembling. "The police are on their way." Chester laughed, a chilling guttural sound that echoed around the room. "The police? And what will you tell them, Mikey? That I'm a monster? That I hurt kids? Who will believe you?" "I have proof," I said, my voice steadier now. "The boy, he's proof of what you've done." Chester's face changed then. His anger was replaced by fear, and for a moment I saw the man he used to be, the man who used to make us laugh. But that man was gone now, replaced by the monster before me. In the end, it was the sirens that saved me. They echoed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Chester turned towards the sound, his face pale. "You can't hide from this, Chester," I said, my voice filled with a determination I hadn't known I possessed. "It's over." And it was. The police arrived in record time and took Chester into custody. The boy was taken to the hospital, his physical wounds treatable, but the psychological scars would take much longer to heal. As for me, I was no hero. I was just a kid who stumbled upon a nightmare. But I knew then that I had a responsibility, to myself and to my community, to ensure that this never happened again. I was left with the memories, the horrors that I had uncovered, and despite the relief we felt by the clown's capture, one thing became clear. My family would never see my brother Timmy again.